Good afternoon and welcome to the fourth round of the Conservative leadership vote. Apologies that we weren't here yesterday. We had a number of technical difficulties, including the fact that our live stream coordinator was stuck in Amsterdam and none of us were confident enough to man the live stream equipment without her. So nice to have you back, Scarlett. And we are ready to go with the fourth round of voting. Don't worry though, we're not going to make sure you've missed out on anything. We're going to make sure we catch you up on what happened yesterday in case you haven't seen this morning's TLDR video, which you should have done. But let's run through first what happened yesterday, because last time we saw you was last Thursday when Suella Braverman was knocked out of the race. Since then, though, there were two major debates on Channel 4 and ITV, and yesterday night, MPs cast another vote, the third round of voting, to decide who they wanted to remove from the race next. Let's have a look at what happened in that voting.
Badenoch, 58, Mordaunt, 82, Sunak, 115, Truss, 71, Tugendhat, 31. So Tom Tugendhat is eliminated from the election.
So, as you just saw, Tom Tugendhat was knocked out of the race, leaving us with four contenders that we have to discuss for the next hour and 44-ish minutes. The next round of voting is expected to come through at 3 p.m, so this is a vague schedule of what you could expect to see over the next just under 2 hours. First up, we'll be discussing the debates that we had over the weekend that we haven't had a chance to discuss fully yet as a team. We will also be discussing those debates with former Conservative MP Ben Howlett, who joined us last Wednesday. Time flies. Last week. So he'll be back to talk to us about the debates and his thoughts on that. We'll also be speaking to the head of political polling at Opinium, the company who have been running all of the polling out of these races, to find out more about what the polls are saying and also find out how the polls are run. We'll also be then later in the live stream. We'll be discussing one of the big issues in this campaign, which is the green issue, kind of looking at net zero and the promises surrounding that. Then later on, we will be going through a daily briefing. We haven't done a daily briefing officially in a while, so we thought we'd catch you up on the news from around the world that you might have missed while we've been so absorbed in the leadership race. And then finally, at around 3 p.m, we will be going to the results live as they come in. Before then, though, as I just said, Tom Tugendhat was knocked out of the race last night. What are your reactions to that? Oh, apologies. I'm joined by Ben, lead writer for TLDR UK, and Zach, TLDR's editor-in-chief.
So I think, Tugendhat had sort of quite a good weekend, it actually turns out, with the debates. He seemed to come out quite well, seemed to present himself quite well as the sort of outsider candidate. I'm sure we're going to sort of drill into that a little bit more later. But that didn't sort of stop him being, in terms of his vote share, he was, next on the chopping block, really.
Yeah.
He didn't really seem to, he didn't seem to be able to translate how well he did in the debates into support from MPs, and he was the next to go. I think most people sort of expected that to happen. I know that we were talking last week about whether he might even drop out. Perhaps he was sort of buoyed by his performance and thought maybe that might help him. But when it came down to it, it didn't. And it kind of went as expected, really.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I do think Tugendhat's elimination was sort of inevitable. He is obviously a good media performer, but fundamentally he's just appealing to too narrow a slice of the parliamentary party to really maintain a wide enough base of support to keep him going. I also think that while he did perform well in the debates and while he was clearly popular, especially if you look at that polling after the debates, which suggests that he won one of the debates and came, I think, second in the other one.
Yeah.
I do think that part of his appeal was downstream from the fact that he spent quite a lot of time attacking both the government that preceded him and ministers and the other candidates on stage. And I think that while that's probably a good way of winning polls, because obviously this current government isn't very popular and just criticising it is largely consistent with what the electorate thinks, it probably didn't go down too well with his fellow Conservative MPs. It was probably a little bit over the top. I reckon. I would assume that actually some Tory MPs thought that he was probably a bit overly critical of Boris Johnson. They didn't like to see that much blue on blue action. I think that my main takeaway from the results yesterday is just that it is amazing how spread parliamentary support still is. I mean, we've done 3 rounds of voting and still no candidate commands a third of the support of a third of the parliamentary party. I mean, it doesn't bode well for the future unity of the Tory party, but also it's just very unlike either 2016 or 2019 when at this point in time, one candidate in 2016 it was Theresa May, and in 2019 it was Boris Johnson, clearly commanded the support of a large swathe of the party. So that's my main takeaway. It's just a remarkably fractured result.
And today I think it's going to be it's going to be the most interesting round so far. And it might get a bit more interesting in the next couple of days, but it's certainly the most interesting round so far because, we're going to see where the sort of right of the party, who they coalesce around, which I know we were speaking about last week. And today's sort of crunch day on that, really, to see which way it sort of goes.
Absolutely. I definitely think that today is almost certainly the most interesting result that we're going to be looking at. I mean, the first round was obviously quite interesting too, because we didn't yet quite know where the support was going to go. The last couple of results, I feel like you probably could have predicted rounds 2 and 3. This time around, I feel like we'll discuss in a moment, but I feel like we maybe have a hunch of who's going to be going out. But I feel like it's kind of hard to write anyone off, and the exact results and the exact numbers could dictate who makes it through. Before we get to our predictions on that, though, and before we get ahead of ourselves, let's continue reflecting on yesterday. Penny Mordaunt is still in second place when it comes to votes, but she lost a vote compared to the previous round of voting. She was down from 82 to 81 supporters. What are your thoughts on that? Is this a worrying sign for her campaign, kind of losing momentum, or is it just an indication of who's been eliminated so far and where those votes are going?
Yeah, I mean, it's not good news that it's sort of stalling.
Sure.
I highly doubt you'll find anyone who's pro-Penny going, it's good news she lost a vote. But yeah, no, I think it's I think it's worrying, but I don't think it's the end of the world. I mean, she, as you say, she is clearly, I say clearly, it's 11 votes in it. But she is still in second place. It's just whether sort of the Tom Tugendhat backers will go with Mordaunt. I think it's likely that some of them will, whether they vote tactically in this round to try and eliminate a particular candidate, likely Liz Truss, to try and get rid of her, and then realign that support tomorrow. That's a possibility. But yeah, it's not great news. I know that we're only talking about one MP here, and I know there was some speculation that I know that you kind of don't agree with too much, Zach. But there was Tobias Ellwood has been kicked out of the party today. He was abroad yesterday, and there was some speculation he backs Penny Mordaunt. So potentially that one backer that she lost could have been Tobias Ellwood because he was away yesterday. Obviously, he can't vote anymore because he's been had the whip removed. You seem to think there's a lot more churn.
I just think I do think that there's probably quite a lot more churn under the surface than we probably assume. I think when you see the sort of simple, plus or minus 1 in Penny Mordaunt's case, and then the +9 in Kemi Badenoch and the +7 in Liz Truss, compared to their previous round of voting, you sort of naturally assume that actually that's just sort of 9 Suella Braverman voters and then 7 Suella Braverman MPs. And I think that actually beneath the surface there'll probably be quite a lot of moving and switching amongst MPs. The thing with the Penny Mordaunt one is I do think in some sense it's best viewed as a sort of correction. I think some of her original popularity was simply the fact that A, she'd spent quite a long time in the parliamentary party preparing her campaign, and B, her popularity in the wider public, at least according to polling, because there was that poll that suggested she was ahead of every other candidate head-to-head, I think was just a downstream consequence of the fact that she was just unknown, and lots of voters and lots of Conservative members could just sort of project what they wanted onto her. And I think that a combination of a sort of mediocre performance in the debates and the endless bashing by the Mail, who, for those of you who aren't sort of familiar with this, the Daily Mail are the second biggest newspaper in the UK, and they've decided they really don't like Mordaunt, so have been sort of, dishing out various insults. I think that this is just sort of a correction back to sort of what you might call like natural Mordaunt levels of appeal. I think it is a bad result, obviously -1, but she will be sort of it will be offset by the fact that Truss, who is obviously third placed, didn't do anywhere near as well as expected, or as well as Truss would have hoped, and so Mordaunt still has a clear lead over Truss. So it's both a bad result intrinsically, but in that wider context, it's not actually a tragedy for her. I mean, she's still clearly in second place.
So as we saw Mordaunt losing votes, we also saw Badenoch and Truss picking up votes, which makes sense because Braverman, the previous person to be eliminated, was broadly on the same side of the party to them. So votes flowing through to other more right-wing candidates makes sense. Crucially, though, Badenoch picked up more votes than Truss did. What do we think about them picking up votes at this stage, and also specifically the split we saw there?
Well, it's only two. There's only two
Yeah, so-
votes in it. So
yeah.
it's not, I think the amount that you can take from that is probably slightly limited.
Sure.
But as we've already sort of alluded to, I think they're the two that we're going to be having an eye on today. And I think, I know we haven't explicitly said that yet, but I think they're the two that are, at risk of going out here. And it's all about where that sort of right of the party coalesce around. Of the previous rounds, as you said, we had sort of a clear indication as to who might go. Today, it's a lot more tricky. I know that currently Badenoch is sort of slightly behind Truss, but it's not. I mean, it's in the sort of early tens, but
Yeah.
it's it could be moved, especially if there's tactical voting. So Truss is still at risk today. It's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think unfortunately the overriding sentiment here is just that it's a really mixed bag of results, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to infer too much from them.
Yeah.
Again, let's just start with Badenoch. On the one hand, it's a good result for her insofar as she gained more support than Truss, who is sort of ideologically her closest competitor. Although I think we should talk about that more in a second, because I do think that actually quite a lot of Badenoch's votes won't go to Truss afterwards. But she did perform better than Truss in that respect, but obviously she didn't make up as much ground as she might have liked, and I still think she is most likely to go out today. And Truss will be buoyed by the fact that she's still maintained a heavy lead over Badenoch, and also the fact that Mordaunt performed poorly today. But again, she won't be particularly happy with her result, because only 7 more MPs is not a good result for someone who hopes to eventually lead the Conservative Party. So again, I think just sort of a mixed bag. I think the most interesting thing here is that while I think that Badenoch is the favourite to go out, it's still a non-trivial possibility that actually she stays in and that Truss goes. And I think that's the thing to watch for today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The only real, the significant individual winner when it comes to total number of votes picked up yesterday was Rishi Sunak, which I think maybe some will be surprised by. I think there's not as obvious a link between Braverman's elimination and Sunak's winning the most votes. What do you take from that? I'm going to ask Zach first, because you were just talking about the kind of correlations of who leads where. So what do you take from the fact that Rishi picked up more votes than anyone else in last round? And what do you think that tells us about not only the round to come, but also, as you were saying, where Badenoch's votes might end up going?
So I think that probably the overriding reason that Rishi picked up a plurality of the available votes is just that Conservative MPs want jobs, and I think though quite a lot of them probably saw him as the front runner and thought, this is the horse to bet my money on.
Yeah.
The reason I think Badenoch is interesting is that I think that at the start of the race, as we all talked about, we described it in these terms as well, Badenoch, Braverman and Truss were all competing to be the standard bearer for the sort of what you might call the right of the Conservative Party. And I still think that's sort of true. I still think that's a good way of framing it. But I do think that actually, oddly, Badenoch might pick up support from Tugendhat supporters, from formerly Tugendhat MPs, because they both are making that sort of clean start appeal to lift some Tugendhat language straight off his playbook. But their appeal is that they're not associated heavily with the previous administration. And I also think that Badenoch actually, if she goes out today, quite a lot of her voters might end up going to Rishi Sunak. She seems to have close personal relations with Sunak. I think they both worked in the Treasury together. But also that they are both talking the same language when it comes to tax cuts. Both of them are wary of unfunded tax cuts, and both of them essentially are pitching themselves as fiscal realists who are going to be honest with the public about the various trade-offs involved in, tax cuts essentially. So that's what. Anyway, I just think that assuming that Truss, Badenoch, and Braverman are all competing for one ideological block, it's a bit more complicated than that. That's what I'm getting at there.
I don't really have much to add. I think Zach's covered most things. I was just going to suggest that this might be another example of churn as well. It's not necessarily that they're all coming from Badenoch.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into more of that in a moment when we discuss the debates which happened over the weekend. They're obviously a significant indicator of what was going to happen yesterday and also could continue to impact today. Before we get to that, though, and before we discuss the debates and before we discuss any more about the leadership race, there was another big event in Parliament yesterday, the vote of no confidence in the government. Before we show you a clip of what happened and what went down in Parliament, quickly, could you just tee up what happened? What was this vote of no confidence all about, and why did this even happen?
Okay, so this all comes back to sort of the chaos in politics the last couple of weeks. In effect, Labour saw this as an opportune time to try and put a vote of no confidence in the government. You know, that would mean that if the government lost, there'd likely be a general election. Labour's wording was a little bit unusual. So their exact wording was that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government, while the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, which is the Prime Minister, remains Prime Minister.
Yeah.
The government has said that they didn't like that wording. It was the whilst and the sort of Prime Minister stipulation.
Yeah.
You know, there's been a bit of back and forth about this. There was this thing in 1965 where there was a vote of no confidence in Harold Wilson that included the Prime Minister as well. I mean, it's all kind of a side note. But in essence, the government didn't want Labour's wording. They received some backlash suggesting that they were trying to avoid a vote of no confidence. So what they did was they worded their own motion, which was just that this House has confidence in the government, which they held yesterday. So this was sort of a response to Labour, and it was so that they could set the wording.
So that they could reject Labour's wording that they didn't like, but they didn't want the backlash of, you're not allowing a vote of confidence, so therefore, hey, we allowed it. We wrote our own one.
To be fair to the government, the wording that they used for the vote of no confidence is like the standard wording.
Sure.
You know, that's not saying that Labour's wasn't, but the one that the government did certainly was. So that's what happened yesterday.
Okay, in which case, let's cut to a clip of what happened. This is the result of the vote, but not only that, it's also some of the moments that led up to it and some important figures you might recognise discussing the vote of confidence.
We now come to the motion of confidence in Her Majesty's government in the name of the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no idea why the Leader of the Opposition has insisted that we must have a confidence motion today, when we could be sparing people from online harms. That's what he wanted. We could be fixing the defects in the Northern Ireland Protocol, ending pointless barriers to trade in our country. But since he wants one,
order. Might be just helpful. It's actually the government that's put it down for today.
And Labour were the first opposition in history to be absolutely petrified of calling a general election. And when they finally capitulated and agreed to submit to the verdict of the people, we sent the great blue Tory ferret so far up their left trouser leg they couldn't move. We won the biggest Conservative victory since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. We won seats they never dreamed of losing. I will give way to my honourable friend. Why not?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. And I personally think that our party is making the same mistake that the Labour Party made when they knifed Tony Blair.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for taking a break from his fantasy tour of this country. Could he take one moment to explain why 14 million people in this country are living in poverty, why there are more food banks than there are branches of McDonald's, why there is a mental health crisis, why Big Pharma have made so much out of owning the patents of the vaccines, why his government is presiding over the enriching of the richest, the impoverishment of the poorest, and the greatest job insecurity in industry after industry. He has created poverty, inequality and insecurity. That is his legacy.
Deathly hush. And the Leader of the Opposition and the deep state will prevail in its plot to haul us back into alignment with the EU as a prelude to our eventual has done, but what it will do and will continue to do. And I commend this motion to the House.
The question is... The question is that this House has confidence in Her Majesty's government. We'll wait and see. But there we are. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, to respond.
Mr. Speaker, the delusion is never-ending. What a relief. What a relief for the country that they finally got round to sacking him. And in many ways, the chaos of the last fortnight is familiar. The third Tory leadership contest in 6 years. The latest bumper summer for graphic designers and brand managers. The latest parade of pretenders promising unfunded tax cuts. Latest set of ministerial jobs handed out on a wink and a shake in return for a nomination. And TV debates so embarrassing that even the contestants are pulling out.
Order.
The ayes to the right, 349. The noes to the left, 238.
Thank you. The ayes to the right were 349. The noes to the left were 238. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.
So that was the result of the vote of no confidence that took place yesterday. Ben, Zach and I will discuss that in a moment, but just a reminder of what's coming up on the stream in the next hour and 20 minutes. We're going to be going through all of the debates and discussing who won, who lost, and whether it really makes any difference. We're going to be discussing how polling works with an interview with Opinion's Chris Curtis, their head of political polling. We're then going to get Ben Howlett, former Conservative MP, back on to discuss the green and energy agenda within this race, as well as making predictions of what could be happening next. And then at around 5 o'clock, we are expecting the final results. So that's what's coming up. Before then, having just seen that video and just looked at the vote of no confidence, what do you think all of this means? Do we think there's any real implications of the vote of no confidence we just saw?
To be quite blunt, no. It's not a huge amount is going to happen for this. I think the most interesting part of the vote of no confidence is the fact that we had 12 Conservatives not vote either way, which is quite an interesting one. And obviously the one that has been in the news a lot today has been Tobias Ellwood, who, as I sort of mentioned earlier, has had the whip removed. Quite interestingly, nobody else has, have they? To my knowledge, no one else has had the whip removed.
No, I think you're right.
With 11 other people who, Tories who didn't vote. There's been a little bit of backlash about that, but to be fair, it is kind of well known that if you don't turn up to vote for, a vote of no confidence or vote of confidence in the government, that things are probably not going to go too well for you, and you're probably going to have the whip withdrawn. So I suppose he can't be too annoyed about that.
Yeah, I agree that it's a sort of constitutional and historical norm that if you're a sitting MP and you don't vote or express confidence in the government at a vote, then obviously you get the whip removed. But I think the controversy has been is the fact that obviously 11 other MPs did the same, and none of them had the whip removed. And there's been some speculation that this is a sort of attempt by Johnson and his government to put a dent in the Mordaunt campaign, because Tobias Ellwood did support Mordaunt, and obviously there you go. And the Johnson campaign are apparently favouring Truss as the sort of Johnson continuity candidate. The only thing I think that's interesting about this is it is typically bad parliamentary management by Johnson. I mean, there was some questions about what happened to Tobias Ellwood, and in response, Number 10 said that, well, he had the whip removed because other MPs made a massive effort to get there, including one MP whose mother died on the morning of the vote. And you've just got to think that actually, forcing MPs, including grieving ones, into Parliament for a vote that you're obviously going to win, it's just not good parliamentary management. It's just only going to upset people. So that's the only thing that I think is of note. It's a symptom of that wider problem that beleaguered Johnson's government, of the fact that he just doesn't have a good hand on MPs.
I would question whether they even actually needed to call that vote of confidence in themselves. I understand that there was obviously the pressure from Labour, and they probably would have had to call one at some point, but calling it in the middle of the leadership campaign and with everything else going on, it just seemed a little bit of an odd an odd choice from the government. And Johnson seemed to forget as well that he, as I think was in the clip, that it was him that called it. It was a bit of a strange one. It was, But going back to the original question, no, I don't think this changes very much. I don't think it's that significant in the grand scheme of things.
Do you think that any of the remarks within the process were particularly interesting or noteworthy? We've obviously seen some of them just there. Were there any that you pick out as particularly noteworthy?
I mean, I think the ones we played were the most noteworthy. Mm-hmm. So outside of those, to be quite honest, I didn't catch much of it. But from the bits that I saw, I think we included most of the interesting ones there. I thought Corbyn's just a bit of a throwback to Corbyn versus Johnson. That was a bit interesting. Obviously, Johnson forgetting that he called the vote of no confidence was quite a memorable moment. But outside of those, it wasn't too much.
I don't think there are any specific comments that are worth pointing to, but I just thought it was sort of psychologically interesting how tonally the Tories were so upbeat in the Commons today. I mean, obviously they're suffering through a sort of painful, catty leadership election. Their Prime Minister is one of the least popular, at least according to polling, in history. And yet they were definitely upbeat in the chamber. And I think it's just essentially, it was a sort of return to the good old days of Boris, you know?
Yeah.
And you could forget about your real troubles. But that was the only thing that I thought was interesting, is that they were surprisingly upbeat.
Yeah.
Okay, that is good to hear. Thank you for your thoughts on the vote of no confidence. One quick news update is, do you remember Raymond Chisty from the beginning of this campaign?
I do.
A real throwback to
real political heavyweight.
Yeah, I know. How could you forget, I guess? It's been announced that he is officially endorsing Rishi Sunak.
He's got it in the bag now, hasn't he?
I mean, Chisty did have a grand total of 0 supporters.
Yeah.
So I'm sure all of them will be rushing straight over to the Sunak camp, and I can't wait to see, quadruple digits probably from Sunak in this vote.
Yeah.
It's going to be unbelievable. We're going to have new MPs entering Parliament. Okay, so that is all we have to say on the vote of no confidence. Before we move on to the debates quickly, if you do have any questions you'd like us to answer, either our panel of the TLDR team or Ben Howlett, former Conservative MP, who's joining us later on in the session. He was part of Theresa May's successful leadership bid back in 2016. So he knows what it's like inside these campaigns. So if you have any questions for us or for him, make sure to tag TLDR News and send those questions in the chat right now. We're going to be monitoring the chat, and when we have a chance later in the stream, we'll come to your questions. First, though, let's jump into the debates. There were 2 major debates this weekend, one on Friday night on Channel 4 and one on ITV on Sunday night. We're going to go through them one by one, starting with the Channel 4 debate. And in case you missed it, here are some of the highlights.
One question, yes or no. Is Boris Johnson honest?
Sometimes. There have been some really severe issues, and I think that he has paid a price for that.
There were a number of reasons that I resigned, but trust and honesty was part of that.
He has been very clear himself that he made mistakes in government, but he had a huge range of achievement.
Boris Johnson, an honest man.
Yes, and you know what? When the NHS needed the resources to tackle these unbelievable backlogs, to reform social care, I did a difficult thing to make sure that the NHS got the money it needed, and you voted against it.
To be fair to you, Rishi, what we did is we had a long conversation about it, and you set out your position, and I asked why on earth this was going to be necessary, and you told me because the boss wanted it. Now, the reality is...
COVID is a 1 in 100-year event. We need to pay for it over the long term. I think it's wrong that ordinary people are bearing the brunt of all of that cost of COVID so soon.
No such thing as COVID debt. Debt is debt. And the answer to too much borrowing can't be yet more borrowing. It's as simple as that. The most pressing economic priority for the new Prime Minister and the new government is to grip inflation.
We have inflation because of our monetary policy, that we haven't been tough enough.
But borrowing your way out of inflation isn't a plan, it's a fairy tale.
I've not done what other candidates have done and said that I will reduce a load of taxes.
Penny, I thought you said you hadn't promised tax cuts. I thought you had said that there should be a dramatic reduction in VAT on petrol now.
I'm slightly surprised because I was the only one who didn't vote for the rise in national insurance, and it now seems everybody agrees with me.
So those are some of the key moments from Channel 4's leadership debate on Friday night. To discuss those with me, to discuss the impacts, the winners and the losers, I'm still joined by Ben Blissett, TLDR UK's lead writer, and Zach Michaelis, TLDR's editor-in-chief. So, obvious place to start. Who do you think the winner of Friday night's debate was?
Well, the polling suggests very much that it was Tugendhat.
Categorically.
Like it was just, he won. I don't think there's much debate about that. Rishi also did quite well. I know that we'll get on to the other debate, but he seems to do better in the sort of second debate. But Tugendhat seemed to try and present himself as a sort of outside candidate, sort of clean break from Johnson. I think he did that fairly effectively. I think he managed to sort of portray the other candidate, and he did try and do this a number of times throughout the debate, try and portray the other candidates as sort of like maybe tainted by Johnson's a bit strong, but certainly that they were all in some way involved in the Johnson government, and that wasn't necessarily a good thing. I think this is where the problems sort of have started from the whole sort of conservative on conservative, and this all being quite bad for the Tories quite generally. I think it started up, and it started to get worse. But Tugendhat.
I'm assuming you agree Tugendhat was the winner of the debate?
Well, I think it depends. This is such a boring answer, but it depends what you mean by winner.
Sure.
I mean, if by winner we're talking about sort of who most appealed to the wider public and the viewers, then I would agree Tugendhat. But I think if by winner we mean who most increased their chances of becoming the next Prime Minister or the next leader of the Tory party, I don't think Tugendhat. I think, as we mentioned earlier, Tugendhat's general appeal with the wider public is in part a sort of reflection of the fact that he spent so much of the debate criticising Johnson, which is an easy vote winner. But it doesn't endear you to Conservative MPs, and especially not those Conservative MPs who are still somewhat nostalgic for the good old days of 2019. And I think actually by that metric, by the metric of who actually increased their chances of winning, I think the answer is Sunak. I think Sunak was the winner in that respect. He was both semi-popular with the viewers, at least according to that polling, and he also definitely outperformed his nearest rivals, especially Truss, who had a bit of a shock at that debate. So I think that's been borne out by the subsequent rounds. I mean, he's consolidated support better than any other candidate, and he looks almost certain to make it through to the final two.
So you say that Truss had a shocker in the first in the first debate.
I think so.
What do you think were her real failings in that?
I think, and Truss herself admits this in other contexts. She admits it in the second debate. But Truss is not a good media performer, and I think that was just the fundamental issue behind it. I don't think it's particularly complicated. I just don't think she's a particularly good media campaigner, and she wasn't given the opportunity to expand on her favourite topics, which are sort of Ukraine and Brexit. And those didn't really come up so much in the first debate, which was mostly, in fact, almost exclusively centred around questions of tax. And sure, it's not actually one of Sunak's favourite topics, but it's not really a classic Truss policy area.
So just on obviously just going back to what you're saying about Rishi Sunak and different measures of how people. I do agree with you that in terms of the increasing the likelihood to become the next Prime Minister, I think Rishi Sunak had a very, very good night on Friday, and this is borne out with the opinion polling. I want to point out that we've not got any sort of relationship with opinion, but it's just that they do a lot of the polling here. So Tugendhat won a lot of the different competencies, so strong leader, shares my views, charismatic and trustworthy. But Sunak was the other candidate who was sort of first placed on the two. So he was first placed on competent and wins an election. So I think he had a good he's had a good night. And he seems to be doing well. And I think that helps his campaign, because I think there's been some polling that happened previously that suggested he basically loses to most other candidates. So I think he needed this sort of momentum over the weekend to sort of put some more faith in him that if he does get to that final two round, that he might actually beat someone. And I think that this weekend might have sort of helped him a little bit with that.
And going back to Truss, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, the same polling you're referencing there, which Tugendhat performed the best in, Truss picked up 6% of the vote, I believe, among the broader electorate. Do you agree with Zach's takes on why that was, or do you think there's something else that really caused her downfall?
I was trying to, when Zach was talking about that, I was trying to think about any specific moments or anything like that she did badly on, but I think I sort of agree with Zach that she's just doesn't sort of communicate very well. And again, as I was saying, that she didn't get the chances that she probably wished she had to speak about things that she was particularly interested in, such as Ukraine. I think a lot of her argument as to why I should become Prime Minister seems to rely on I've got a lot of experience, specifically with foreign affairs and things like that. And that might go down well with a certain section of the public, but she just doesn't do well in these sort of these sort of environments.
Okay, so we asked Ben Howlett about this in an interview that we conducted yesterday. Here are his thoughts on Truss's performance and why he thinks that Truss might still pick up support from the party, despite the fact that she performed fairly badly in this first debate.
So I agree, obviously. I don't think she's been the best media performer, either in the last couple of debates or historically. But what do you think? I mean, surely Conservative MPs are conscious of this. I'm sure they saw the polling at the end of the Channel 4 debate, which suggested that about 1% of the population thought she did well, 1% of the viewers.
I'm surprised it's that high.
Sure, yeah, but surely MPs are conscious of this. So why do you think she still commands so much support within the parliamentary party?
So Liz Truss has got the ERG support. I mean, that's really important for her campaign. If you've got the sort of the right Brexit ideologues behind you, you'll continue on having support. I think until last night, I would have thought that quite a few MPs would switch maybe over to Kemi Badenoch because Kemi's performance has outstripped probably most of the candidates, to be honest with you. But, you know, I'm not sure that's going to happen now. I think probably most of them rationally will want to sort of rally behind Liz because who really wants to be supporting the sort of second-rate candidate. You know, they want to back a winner and they believe that Rishi versus Liz will probably have the best chance of them securing power.
So I think that's pretty much all we have to say on that first debate. I think on the whole, it was slightly less interesting, dramatic, catty, however you want to put it, than the second one. But Zach, do you think there are any key moments that are worth paying attention to in that first debate that could impact the race in any way?
I think as it were, I think I'm just going to go for sort of what I see. There's three big takeaways from it. I think the first one is how keen all the candidates were to distance themselves from Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was made most apparent in that question. Krishna Guru Murthy asked who thinks Johnson is honest, and everyone sort of either didn't answer the question, or at least in Tugendhat's case said no. Got a big round of applause for it. I think the other thing worth noting is how exclusively focused the intellectual or policy debate was on tax, on the issue of tax.
Yes.
I mean, in the debate as a whole, really didn't touch on any other policy area, at least not substantially. And I think that is both obviously because the question of taxes is politically prominent at the moment. We've just had national insurance rises and that has hit the headlines. But I also think it is reflective of a sort of intellectual staleness in the Conservative Party at the moment. You're having reheated Thatcher arguments for nearly 50 years on. And I think that probably the scale of the problems that are facing the country require more creative solutions. And I think this is something we talked about actually earlier when we said that it's a shame that Javid went out just because he is at least a policy heavyweight. And having someone with a more ironclad grip on policy would have been good for the intellectual quality of the debate. But the final thing I think is worth noting is while it wasn't as catty as the second debate, which we'll get onto in a bit, I guess, it was still, I think, more catty than any of the candidates would have wanted to be. I mean, there was one of the earlier questions when they asked sort of like, would you work with all of your fellow candidates? And everyone was quite nice about each other. Rishi Sunak said he was privileged to stand on the stage with these other candidates. But as the debate wore on, it quickly descended into more cattiness. And again, I think this is going to be a problem for the Conservative Party in the future because it is a symptom of how disunified the party currently is, how fractured it is, and whoever wins this contest will have to struggle to deal with that problem.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is that obviously this is sort of the ITV debate was obviously more catty. There's a bit more sort of back and forth, but this did start on Friday night, and there were some quite fruity moments, and Labour have sort of taken advantage of that already, and probably will in the future.
Okay, so that's the first debate done. The second debate took place on Sunday night on ITV. And in case you missed that one, because it was a bit more dramatic, let's take a look at some highlights from the ITV debate on Sunday night.
Rishi, you have raised taxes to the highest level in 70 years. That is not going to drive economic growth because we could have afforded to fund the NHS through general taxation.
I'd love to stand here and say, look, I'll cut this tax, that tax, and another tax, and it will all be okay. But you know what? It won't. There's a cost to these things, the cost of higher inflation, higher mortgage rates. This something for nothing economics isn't conservative, it's socialism.
Okay,
but Penny, you're generally proposing that we borrow to fund our day-to-day spending, putting those bills on a credit card. Literally, Jeremy Corbyn didn't think that was the right approach.
He's got this great plan for growth. Why haven't we seen it in his last 2.5 years at the Treasury?
Look, I'll leave Rishi to answer his own record, because I'm finding it very difficult to understand who's disowning and who's defending the record of the last few years that they've been in government. It's pretty confusing to me anyway.
Even Keir Starmer is attacking leadership candidates for peddling the fantasy economics of unfunded promises. If we're not for sound money, what is the point in the Conservative Party?
If he wished to serve, who here would be happy to have Boris Johnson in their cabinet? Please raise your hands.
I think this whole thing is unedifying. And I would just say to all 4 of my other colleagues and candidates here, I know why this is being done. But what I would say to you is that all attempts to paint me as an out-of-touch individual will fail. I'm the only person on this stage that has won and fought a Labour seat.
I believe in the Ronald Reagan dictum that you shouldn't speak ill of a fellow Conservative.
Some of your
A war in
supporters
Europe.
have, Liz Truss.
I certainly don't believe in that kind of campaign. I'm fighting a positive campaign. I'm very clear with people in my campaign that we should be focusing on the core issue which is facing Britain.
The first campaign meeting I had in this contest, I said to my team, we are going to campaign as we're going to govern. And people want a break with the toxic politics of the past.
My question's for Liz, actually. Liz, in your past, you've been both a Liberal Democrat and a Remainer. I was just wondering which one you regretted most.
I am somebody who was not born into the Conservative Party. I went to school in Paisley and Leeds. I went to a comprehensive school. My parents were left-wing activists, and I've been on a political journey ever since. But my fundamental belief, and the reason I am a Conservative, is I saw kids at my school being let down in Leeds. I saw them not get the opportunities, not get the proper educational standards that you might have got at your school, Rishi. I saw them having wasted potential, and I thought that waste was wrong.
So those were some highlights from the ITV debate on Sunday night. We're about to discuss the implications of that, who won and who lost, but first, just to bring everyone in, we have about an hour to go until we're expecting to see the 4th round results of the Conservative leadership race. There are currently 4 candidates vying for number 10. Only 3 will make it through to the next round, with 1 expected to be eliminated, or 1 will be eliminated. We'll discuss the candidates, we'll discuss that all later on in the live stream, but first, let's discuss that 2nd round debate. I'm joined, as previously, by Zach Michaelis, Editor-in-Chief at TLDR, but I'm also joined by Nelson Fernandez-Cerro, TLDR EU's Leeds writer. So, 2nd round debate. Yep. Let's start with the obvious winners and losers, starting with you, Nelson.
Yep, so I would say the winner definitely in this debate was Rishi Sunak. He was clear, he was polished and slick. Now, yes, Liz Truss used this as a backhanded compliment at one point, but for me, by far and away, the winner was Rishi Sunak. When it comes to loser, it's a bit harder to say, but I would say that Liz Truss still isn't performing as some of her supporters would have liked her to perform. Mm-hmm. So I would say Liz Truss is the main loser from the debate.
Zach, do you agree with those?
Yeah, I would agree with that analysis. The only caveat I would mention is that while I think Rishi Sunak definitely comes across as both the most competent and the most intelligent, I don't think that's controversial to say. I mean, he's clearly an articulate bloke and he has a good grasp of the various policy areas. He doesn't necessarily come across as that statesman-like, and that is reflected in the polling. I mean, there was some polling done afterwards, which suggested that while Sunak came out top on sort of questions of competence and who you like more, as to whether or not you'd like him as Prime Minister, it was more of a narrow battle, and he sort of ended up even on with people like Mordaunt and Tugendhat. So that's the only caveat I would put in there, but I do think it was a good result for Sunak. I think while Truss performed better than she had in her previous debate, in large part because those policy areas that we talked about a second ago did come up more, and also she was helped, I think, by the more catty nature of this debate. I think that actually she can throw mud just as well as the next person. I still think that Nelson's right, and that fundamentally she's just not a good media performer, and that it won't have helped her campaign that much. While it was an improvement on the previous debate, it wasn't a stellar performance.
What about the other candidates? Notably, Badenoch, the kind of ratings of her post the second debate was slightly weaker than the first debate. Do you think that's purely by virtue of the other candidates stepping up and doing better, or do you think there was a kind of decline in performance from Badenoch in the second debate?
I think it was a bit of both, and they just cancel each other out. I think all the candidates performed, in absolute terms, worse than the first.
Sure.
In that this was just a far more confrontational debate. It wasn't policy orientated, it was persona orientated. And so it just seemed more divisive. And from my recollection, people don't like divisive debates. They do not like a divided party. So all of the polling got dragged down a bit.
Okay.
But as Zach was saying, Liz Truss, she did improve a bit, but I think all of them were just tainted by this controversial, catty nature of debate.
How do you think Badenoch played into this second round?
I think Badenoch, her appeal is both as a sort of clean start candidate, unassociated with Johnson, but also as a sort of like bright ideas candidate. She has some interesting policy positions. I'm saying interesting without any connotations there. I mean, the interesting stuff comes around the Bank of England and critical race theory and green policy. She has some controversial takes on that sort of thing. And I think that Nelson's right in that the catty nature of this debate and its focus on personalities over policy probably did disadvantage Badenoch, who would have performed better had there been, she would be able to at least differentiate herself from the other candidates had the debate been more focused on policy. And she got a little chance to do that at the end when there was a question about net zero. I think I'm saying shone. I mean, she shone to the eyes of Conservative members and MPs there. But yeah, I think Nelson's essentially right, is that the personality-focused aspect of this debate meant that Badenoch didn't have space to shine. And she probably need to, given that she is last.
Besides the cattiness, the confrontation, the drama of all of that, were there any other key moments in this debate? Anything substantial that was worth paying attention to?
There were just some weird takes and weird policies. The main thing that made me pause was when each candidate got a chance to ask each other a single question. Most people piled on Rishi about his tax affairs, about recession, because he is ultimately the only one not advocating for tax affairs immediately. People piled on him. Rishi then piled on Liz Truss by saying, which do you regret more, being a Remainer or being a Liberal Democrat?
Yeah.
And that most people were asking policy-orientated questions, but Rishi he doesn't do catty well. He's not a catty person.
It did backfire a bit.
It did backfire a bit. And yes, it later transpired that Liz Truss's response
doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense on any level, but it didn't feel right watching this in the debate. It had better place in a roast battle, not in a political debate.
Yeah, I would agree with Nelson. I think that it just doesn't play to Rishi's strengths. I think this is what goes back to the thing that I mentioned earlier, is that actually while he's clearly very competent and he's a very articulate guy, he does occasionally come across as not particularly statesmanlike. And I think that was a good example of that. The question that I thought was actually quite interesting was Truss, who asked Rishi a question about China. And foreign policy hasn't been involved at all in the leadership election, not just the debate so far. And I thought that was an interesting sort of little left turn. But it didn't really come to anything. But I think that if we end up with a Rishi Truss final two, you should expect to see the Truss campaign pushing foreign policy a bit harder, not just because it's her strength, but I presume because they also think that Sunak would be softer on various things like China and Russia than Truss. The other things that I thought were interesting were the policy focus. So again, we mentioned about how in the first debate was, when it comes to policy, almost exclusively focused on tax. This debate did touch some other areas. There was a discussion about net zero, and obviously, slightly worryingly, various candidates expressed some skepticism. I think most of them wanted to keep the target. I think all of them want to keep the target, but there were reservations in there. There were qualifications. Some of them were saying that if it quote unquote bankrupts the country, they won't go for it. And I think there was some merit to that idea. I mean, Kemi Badenoch in the first debate mentioned how the UK is going to have to sort of lead the way on net zero. We have some very good structural advantages when it comes to making the green transition. And so if we don't make it, then we will discourage other potential green transition countries. And we have a responsibility in that respect. And she's right to point that out. So obviously the green transition needs to be done well. But you worry about where that sort of what sounds like reasonable skepticism where that might end up policy-wise. You know, you're going to start off going, is net zero a good idea? Then you're going to scrap a couple of levies, and then, you know, when it comes to 2030, all of a sudden we're just burning coal. But the other thing I thought was interesting, and interesting for a couple of reasons, was the focus on the independence of the Bank of England, which was a sort of big structural constitutional change made by the Blair government in 1997, give the Bank of England independence. They have a simple mandate, which is to keep inflation at 2%. And both Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch were questioning it. And I think that is partly just political. That is just politicians trying to shift the blame,
scapegoat,
to the Bank of England for inflation as opposed to themselves. But I also think that it's sort of confused because, I mean, Liz Truss was mentioning as a sort of ideal monetary institution, mentioning Japan. Japan. And I mean,
We've been in the deflationary trap for
I know
decades.
it was confusing. So I thought it was intellectually confused. I thought it was a shame that we saw one sort of interesting area of policy, and the policy suggestion we got was just, I mean, it was just confused.
Sure. So finally on this debate then, you obviously alluded to it already. We've basically, the core talking point of the debate is the cattiness of it. What impact do we think that has on the party? The fact that this slid from being very kind of ITV News towards a more Comedy Central roast battle. What do you think that means for the party? How does that appear for the electorate when it comes to the Tories?
Well, it's been proven time and time again that the electorate do not like a divided party. If a party is infighting, like we saw with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, if you cannot get your troops rallied around a common flag, it will not end well. And what this debate in particular just gave to the Labour Party, just sound bites. You've just got amazing sound bites of Tories bashing Tory policy. And the Labour Party have already come out with a beautiful attack ad where they've just clicked,
which we'll watch later in the stream.
With it, they've just clicked Tory words, and it's there for their taking.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Nelson. I think that clearly the Tory party agree as well, which is why they've pulled out of the subsequent debates.
Yes. So we also asked Ben Howlett, former Conservative MP, about this issue, and here's what he had to say on the impact of these debates for the Conservative Party.
How much of an impact do you think these debates have on both the parliamentary party and, you know, the process for narrowing down to the final two, which is exclusively for MPs, but also on the Conservative membership and what they think of the candidate?
Well, I think earlier on today, Stephen Swinford announced that apparently on Friday night, Rishi Sunak leant over to Liz Truss after and asked why we're doing this. And to an extent, I can kind of see why. You know, when pollsters are asking the public whether or not they think a party is divided or not, that does have a significant weight in terms of how they end up ultimately voting at a general election. Watching candidates fight like cats in a sack and then see them come back together again afterwards, I think has been a deeply damaging exercise for the Conservative Party. Great telly, terrible for the Conservative Party's unity. So what we're now seeing is MPs say enough's enough. They agree that Tom and Liz made the right decision not to go up on the Sky News debate tomorrow. No one's really coming out saying that was a bad decision. They think it's sort of a bit of light relief, really, because their inboxes are currently seeing, you know, people from their constituencies complaining about how awful this shower of a debating series has gone.
Yeah, so clearly that you think damaging as a whole for the Tory brand. But even, I mean, that aside, I think I would agree with that. Do you think it's made any difference to sort of the candidates' various chances?
Yeah, no, I think it really has. And I think that's largely down to unknown candidates getting a lift up in terms of their personal profiles. So similar to the whole sort of 2010 Nick Clegg, David Cameron piece, who the heck is Nick Clegg? No one's ever heard of him before. And he ends up becoming Deputy Prime Minister because he's the untold, unseen candidate. And then lo and behold, there he is. So Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, certainly given more profile, and vice versa. You know, Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt's positions, I think, have been damaged by it. So, you know, debates are important, and they're also very good tests to see how candidates are going to fare at Prime Minister's questions as well.
As interesting as that interview is, we're going to have to move on the stream right now. But if you want to watch the entire interview, it's available exclusively on Nebula, streaming service my creator friends and I set up, where we post exclusive videos, and all of our videos are available ad-free. If you're a Nebula member, you can go there right now to watch the entire interview. If you're not, then give me 30 seconds to explain how it works. The cheapest way to sign up to Nebula is using the CuriosityStream Nebula bundle deal. This deal gets you both streaming services for about £1 a month, which is a crazy good deal. In return, you get both streaming services. You get CuriosityStream and the best documentaries available online, and you get Nebula, which features premium creator content like all of our exclusive videos. So, if you sign up to CuriosityStream right now using the link in the description, you'll get Nebula included absolutely free. And that's not a free trial either. It's free for as long as you're a member. So click the link down below, support the channel, and check out the full video. Thanks for your support. So those are some of Ben Howlett's thoughts on the debates and the impact it would have on the Conservative Party. Before we continue our conversation, it's worth noting, some of you have already spotted this in the comments, that it's been announced that the BBC will be holding a head-to-head debate on Monday night at 9 p.m. Between the two final candidates. So we are likely to make a video or do a live stream or something in reaction to that. So keep an eye on the channel. But just so you know, Monday night is the next debate. But staying on debates, there's still more debates to talk about before we even get there. I'm joined by Ben, who you saw in the clip. How weird, welcome back. And Zach is still here too. So, you obviously mentioned yesterday when we were talking about the impact that these debates would have on the party and your concerns around them. Do those concerns carry? Are you still concerned about that? Or have you had new revelations since then?
Well, look, for me, it's not just the division that's created. I believe the opposition are now starting to take a pop at the current government as well in respect to that division. But it's MPs' view around the division that the debates have caused. So the hustings, I believe, over the last couple of days, from what MPs have told me, have been a lot more concordial. They've been a lot more cohesive than they probably were on TV. So I think they've learned something from that. But obviously, we'll see what happens on the debate on Monday.
Obviously there we referenced the opposition using this as an attack method. This is something that many Conservatives feared in the reaction to the debates and even in the run-up to the debates. It seems that those fears have materialised already. Maybe the Conservatives gave the Labour Party some ideas, but this advert was published by the Labour Party this afternoon. You might want to take a look at it.
All your bills every week, every month, they're going up and up and up.
What we've seen in recent years is taxes rising to the highest level in 70 years.
Under your plans, we are predicted to have a recession.
It has been a really difficult time with public sector pay. We need to create an economy that can fund it, and I'm not sure we're there yet.
I'd love to stand here and say, look, I'll cut this tax, and another tax, and it will all be okay. But you know what? It won't.
Higher food prices, higher petrol prices.
People need help now. We make promises we can't keep.
It's not just wrong, it's dangerous. We cannot make it worse.
If Rishi has got this great plan for growth, why haven't we seen it in his last 2.5 years at the Treasury?
I'm finding it very difficult to understand who's disowning and who's defending the record of the last few years that they've been in government.
The worst economic crisis for a generation.
Why should the public trust us? We haven't exactly covered ourselves in glory.
So, Zach, what are your thoughts on this? Obviously, the opposition are already using it as ammunition against the Conservatives. It's something we kind of predicted, but do you think this is going to be damaging for them longer term, or is this a temporary blip for the party?
I mean, yeah, this was definitely foreseeable,
yeah.
If not inevitable. I always think this attack ad will have some purchase, but I think almost this is a symptom of a wider problem. Fundamentally, I think we've talked about so many times, but the Conservatives are really fractured, and this is coming out in the debates, and sure, Labour are making hay of it, but it's only a symptom of that more fundamental problem, which is that a fractured party is difficult to govern, and that's what Boris Johnson has seen so far, and whoever inherits this parliamentary party will probably struggle in the near term. So yeah, I think while obviously there's a particular problem here in that they're bashing each other live on telly, that is a symptom of a more wider and a more fundamentally important problem, which is that the Conservative Party is currently ideologically and factionally fractured.
And when it comes to the debate's actual substance, do you think that this would have shifted the needle at all in the results we saw yesterday, in the results that are to come? When we spoke yesterday, you did predict that Tom Tugendhat would be eliminated. Obviously not necessarily a symptom of the debates, considering he performed fairly well, at least with the broader public. But do you think the debates we've been discussing will actually have any impact, or have we just wasted 40-ish minutes?
Probably longer than that. But in terms of the amount of time wasted, I don't think it has, actually. I think in terms of Liz Truss and Kemi Badenoch sort of tit for tat, I think that's probably had a significant impact. Obviously, Penny Mordaunt lost votes yesterday, notwithstanding the fact that one of her supporters has just lost the whip, outrageously. But also, the debates have exposed how quality a candidate is in being able to perform in Prime Minister's questions as well. So all of that testing is really, really important to see. But I'm not sure the attack ad that we've just seen is going to have much of an impact with Tory MPs' mindset.
And when it comes to the final debate, or the final round debates at least, I imagine we'll see a few of these. First one on Monday night, as we just said. Do you think we can expect a slightly different tone? Obviously, we don't know who the final two candidates will be, but do you think they'll have heeded a warning from this and they'll attempt to be more cordial, or do you think we're going to see more of the same?
I think it depends on who it is, actually, and how much they can actually contain themselves. Some candidates are better at debating than others, and whoever's going to be up against Rishi Sunak, let's be honest, that's what's going to happen now. They're not going to be able to debate him in the way that he's able to. He's obviously leagues above any of the other candidates from that perspective, but I don't necessarily think that's going to sway Conservative Party members' minds. At the end of the day, they do like a good ideological candidate, despite the fact that ideology might not necessarily be aligned to my own, let alone Rishi Sunak's own ideology.
Absolutely. And when it comes to Badenoch and when it comes to Truss this evening, you've alluded to the fact the debates may have shifted some minds there. Throughout the race so far, Truss has been leading. They're both on the bottom end of the rankings in third and fourth place. It's kind of inevitable that one of the two will go this evening. Which one are you thinking is looking more likely to go, and has that been dictated to at all by the debates?
Well, I also think there's quite a few devious MPs in the party as well who may end up voting with a particular candidate and then shift at the last minute as well. It has been known in the past for that to happen too. So it isn't over until the fat lady sings in this instance. But if I was putting money on it, I would say that Kemi is the most likely to leave the contest tonight. Tom Tugendhat still hasn't, and he's already said that he's going to move his MPs en bloc, which is quite hard to do in reality. But anyway, he's saying that he's going to move them en bloc to a particular candidate, and that's highly unlikely to be Liz Truss. So that may end up propping up Kemi Badenoch, for example, which would then mean Liz is out. So there are plenty of options here, and I don't think anyone will really know until the MPs have left that hot, sweaty room.
Okay, so that's all we have on the debates for the moment. We will come back to predictions and we'll come back to this evening's vote in a moment, this afternoon's vote, sorry. First though, a lot of what we've been reflecting on here has been kind of dictated by opinion polling and the results that have come out of the debates. The main people who have been coordinating those opinion pollings are Opinium. They're an opinion poll company that have been looking very closely at the race and specifically the debates themselves. This morning, I was able to speak to their head of political polling, Chris Curtis, and here are some of the things he had to say about the debates and also the polling around the election more generally.
I think there is a risk that could happen, and part of that is down to values, particularly economic values. The Conservative Party has gained a lot of people in those so-called red wall seats who are fairly left-wing on economics. And, the Conservative Party is going to have to appeal to them at the next election, talking about the importance, for example, of good public services, good, well-funded public services. I think the biggest problem for the Conservatives, though, is not necessarily about ideology, but it's about priorities. They need to make sure that the priorities that they're talking about in this Conservative leadership contest match the priorities of voters in the country. And so far, from what we've seen, those two priorities don't seem to be matching up very well.
You've mentioned, obviously, cost of living being one of the issues that matters most to kind of the broader electorate. But what other issues are we seeing really come up as being important in this race and also to the electorate more generally?
Well, there's issues that are coming up quite a lot in this debate, which the public really don't have strong views on. Transgender rights, I think, is probably the most common example of that. But to be honest with you, when it comes to the priorities of the general public at the moment, what you're usually getting when you're talking to voters is, I care about the cost of living crisis, and why the hell are you asking me about anything else? When people seeing their bills go up by such a large amount, it's clear that their top priority is going to be what the government's response to that is. And when they're seeing people in their communities as well really struggling in response to the cost of living crisis, that's the problem that they want to find a solution to.
Another area where politicians are suggesting cuts could be made or changes could be made in order to fix the cost of living crisis is the green agenda, with a number of suggestions about sacrificing environmental policies in the short term in order to build long-term economic growth. Are we seeing any evidence in polling that the public are losing interest in the environment as we slip into the cost of living crisis, or is interest still holding up?
Look, the public have never wanted a response to climate change that puts undue pressure on their personal financial situation. And that is just as true now in the cost of living crisis as it was before. But having said that, the public do think that the government should be doing a lot more, wherever it can be, in order to alleviate the damages of climate change. It overwhelmingly supports the net zero target. It thinks that this is one of the biggest problems facing our country and our planet in the coming decades. So I think a Prime Minister who turns their back on the climate agenda is going to get some kind of kickback from the general public when it comes to an election.
And you mentioned earlier that there's certain issues that are being discussed that aren't of great interest to the public. You mentioned kind of the transgender debate. Do you think that the kind of culture war issues that are being waged by some of the candidates resonate at all outside of the core Conservative membership? Or are there certain issues which you can see hitting a bit harder?
I think what we're broadly seeing happening right now, and you've seen it happen on the left of politics as well, this is in no way something that is unique to the Conservative Party, but it's basically the Twitterification of politics. You see a certain group of unrepresentative people online, or you see TV pundits on right-wing news channels on television, and you just think they're representative of your sort of wider political ideology, and they're just not. The kind of things they're talking about, the kind of things they care about, the kind of culture war drums that they keep banging and banging and banging are just not the issues that voters out there in the country care about. And the Conservative MPs that get that are the Conservative MPs who will best be able to appeal to members of the public in the general election.
If we assume that Sunak is going to make it to the final round, as looks fairly likely at this point, which of the other competitors who's still in the race do you think would be the biggest competition for him?
I think that's really tough question. I think it's incredibly close. I think Penny Mordaunt would still be the tougher battle in the final two against Sunak, just because I think she'd be better at those hustings than Liz Truss would be, and eventually, you know, her strengths would make life more difficult for him. But having said that, Liz Truss on members polling so far seems to be doing a little bit of a better job at beating Sunak. So it really is close. I think on balance, just about Mordaunt would be more difficult.
Okay, and finally, looking at your polling and looking at the data that we have, who do you think Keir Starmer is most concerned about going up against in the next general election? As interesting as that interview is, we're going to have to move on the stream right now. But if you want to watch the entire interview, it's available exclusively on Nebula, streaming service my creator friends and I set up, where we post exclusive videos, and all of our videos are available ad-free. If you're a Nebula member, you can go there right now to watch the entire interview. If you're not, then give me 30 seconds to explain how it works. The cheapest way to sign up to Nebula is using the CuriosityStream Nebula bundle deal. This deal gets you both streaming services for about £1 a month, which is a crazy good deal. In return, you get both streaming services. You get CuriosityStream and the best documentaries available online, and you get Nebula, which features premium creator content like all of our exclusive videos. So, if you sign up to CuriosityStream right now using the link in the description, you'll get Nebula included absolutely free. And that's not a free trial either. It's free for as long as you're a member. So click the link down below, support the channel, and check out the full video. Thanks for your support. Okay, welcome back. We are just over half an hour away from the next round of results. And as I just said, as you saw me say a moment ago, if you do want more content from us around this issue, both the interview with Opinium and our full discussion with Ben yesterday, both those can be found exclusively on Nebula. We do really appreciate your support. We obviously get paid per sign-up. So the more of you sign up, the better, and it really is helping to fund not only these streams, but also the company more generally. So there's a ton of free content on there and a bunch of exclusive stuff too. So thank you so much for your support. Okay, let's continue. The next thing we want to discuss is each time we've been doing a stream, we've been picking one big issue from the debates and from the campaigns and from the rhetoric and all that kind of stuff. We started with the trans discussion, then we moved on to taxation and all of that kind of cost of living things. Today we want to take a look at specifically the green agenda, net zero, all of the priorities surrounding that, the green levy. So would one of you like to take us through the broad talking points from that, from the candidates and from the kind of conversation more generally?
Want to go for it?
Yeah, I can do.
Sure.
I think the thing I would probably push back on for the candidates is the word big issue for them. It's a big issue for everybody else, but apparently not necessarily so on this election trail, which is bizarre in many ways. It also says something about how unrepresentative the very small numbers of people who are in the electorate are representative of wider the population. So in terms of the candidates so far, probably out of all of them, Rishi Sunak has said the most on it. There is a Conservative Environmental Network hustings, which no one will have heard of outside of this room, but it's a caucus of MPs who are very supportive of green targets that have been committed to. All the candidates have said that they support it. I think the most baffling response I've heard so far in any of the debates is Kemi Badenoch's response, saying that she believes in climate change. Well, it's very nice that she has to sort of reinforce the point she believes in it, like none of us do, apparently. So in terms of the other candidates, though, they haven't necessarily set out a strong set of manifesto commitments at this stage in respect of green issues, probably because it's not on the top sort of level of radar, list of radar points on for MPs at the moment. So expect more to come over the next couple of months as they set out their agenda for members, at least anyway.
What do you think around the fact that this hasn't been as big a conversation as you might expect? As we heard in the conversation with Chris Curtis just then, the environment continues to be one of the public's biggest issues. The electorate still care about it a lot. They've never particularly liked it when those environmental priorities also mean them sacrificing things, and that's obviously where it gets difficult with the green levy and cost of living. But what do you think, both of you, about the fact that this hasn't been as big an issue as you might expect, given broader conversation around environmental issues?
Sure. Well, I think there are sort of two reasons that it hasn't come up as much as you might expect it to. I think we should also say that actually, given the relative dearth of policy in the debates more generally, I mean, the fact that it's been mentioned is at least some good news. I think the two reasons are essentially, first, that I think that so far the candidates aren't quite sure what the politically optimum position is here. This is both because polling on questions of the environment is very difficult to interpret. If you look at sort of general questions, if you ask people, do they support net zero, majorities in the UK support net zero, and only very small minorities oppose it. And if you ask them what their sort of political priorities are, the environment normally comes pretty high up the list. But then if you poll them more specific questions, where you sort of really drill down into the various trade-offs between sort of environmental priorities and certain like fees, then the polling gets a little bit more confused. If you start asking people, would they support scrapping green levies, which actually just refers to a whole host of policies, and they make up about 10% of fuel bills, then actually a plurality of voters, especially and a larger plurality of Conservative voters, do support scrapping green energies to reduce energy bills. So I think that's one reason I think that they're not quite sure what the politically optimum position is. But I also think the other reason is that they've all settled in this sort of consensus view that the standard answer amongst the candidates to the question of whether or not they support net zero is yes, but with the condition that if it bankrupts the country, no.
Yeah.
And I think originally that you probably would have predicted someone like Kemi Badenoch was going to take a slightly more hawkish stance on net zero, and she would have been able to differentiate herself, and that might have sort of provided the fuel for a full-on argument. But now that they've all taken essentially the same position, I just don't think there's much space for candidates to individuate themselves.
Yeah, I mean, economically complex to explain this to the general public as well.
Sure.
And everyone is feeling the pain in their pockets, despite the fact that obviously we all know that economically speaking, if you end up investing more into green renewables, you obviously end up saving people long term. But that's not felt in the here and now. And a lot of candidates realise that and recognise that. MPs are often representative of their inboxes, and their inboxes are currently pressured by people emailing them saying, please help me in the here and now. So the candidates are reflecting that, I think. I think the longer term point is that if there's an emergency budget, which I think most of the candidates will have directly after they become the Prime Minister in September, as one of their key priorities, they're going to have to say something. And they're also going to have to say something in respect of mitigating the losses from a revenue point of view as a result. So that's a real challenge for whoever's going to take on the Treasury, particularly if you've ended up reeling out a very long list of tax cut promises as well, because they will not be able to afford it unless you borrow more.
Absolutely. And when it comes to their green ideologies, their green agendas, do you think we're going to see any kind of rollback of sorts once the eventual person becomes nominated and kind of brought into position? Will we see them green up a bit?
It's hard for me to see them green up. I think
I'm not sure I'm happy with the term green. I know I just coined it, but can I just walk that back immediately?
I don't know really what to say on it. But I don't see any of them sort of enhancing. I think protecting the status quo is probably all that we can hope for. Once, of course, the economy has sorted itself out. And frankly, sadly, with the economy in the way that it is, we'll end up with stagflation for a long period of time. So I can't see any candidate promising much on this for the short term anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I think the important qualification there is that we're talking about the near term here. I think that in the near term, you're unlikely to see anything except for the maintenance of the status quo. For the reason that Ben mentioned earlier, which is that it's actually it's going to be difficult for any candidate to really convince the Treasury otherwise, and not just the Treasury, also the wider international community. I mean, once you become Prime Minister, it becomes politically a lot more difficult to start rowing back on green commitments just because you face pushback in the international community more widely, especially from various European leaders at this point. But in the long term, or in the medium to long term, we're talking a couple of years here, I think it probably essentially depends on the sort of macroeconomic conditions in the UK. I think that you'll see a lot more pushback on this if the economy continues to struggle and therefore the cost of living continues to go up. And then I think that issue will hit political salience.
I'll tell you what you will see, though. You'll see a huge amount of commitments coming out around nuclear from all the candidates in the future as well. And I suspect the Labour Party, and I know obviously they've changed tack now, particularly on things like the development of Sizewell, are going to have to change their position on this, because there's no way they're going to be able to hit the targets that they have to without embracing nuclear. And that's quite popular, actually, amongst the Conservative Party membership.
Sorry, that's a good point. We should definitely have mentioned that, actually. And actually, that's been a slow burner as well. That the nuclear issue has
long burner, actually.
Well, but the nuclear issue has risen up, especially the Conservative policy agenda over the last sort of couple of years or so. And I think that's to my mind, fundamentally a good thing, and it's fundamentally a downstream consequence of the fact that the energy reality is kicking in, and that as time comes on those various net zero targets, politicians are realizing that the only way to hit those targets is to commit to, essentially nuclear, or slightly less popular forms of renewable energy.
Great. Good to hear your thoughts on the issue. Thank you to both of you. We're going to take a very short break. We'll be back in less than a minute to discuss some of the other big news from around the world today. Then we are 25 minutes away from the next round of results. So keep your questions coming in. Make sure to tag us, TLDR News, in your questions in the chat. We're keeping an eye on those, and we'll come back to those at the end. So see you again in just a few seconds' time. As you've probably seen in the chat, we just put a poll up asking all of you who your preferred candidate is. Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, or Kemi Badenoch. Currently, it's pretty close between Sunak and Mordaunt, so keep voting, and we'll be discussing your thoughts later on. Okay, before we continue, we have 24 minutes left until the next round of results. So let's take a moment. We've discussed the leadership election a lot. There's other stuff going on around the world. We normally, every single day, do a series called The Daily Briefing on the TLDR Daily channel. And over there, we run through the 5 biggest news stories each day in just 5 minutes. If you're not subscribed, you really ought to. You can go just search for TLDR Daily, I guess. I don't know. You can find it. You're an adult. You know how YouTube works. So we're going to do something a bit like that now. We're going to spend 5-10-ish minutes running through 5 stories that are big around the world before we come back to discussing the leadership election in just a moment. So, 5 stories. Let's start with the heatwave in Europe. Who's going to talk to me about that?
Yep, so that's me. The heatwave in Europe we're experiencing in the UK, obviously. And to start off with, let's focus on UK. And when it comes to the UK, we've had the hottest night on record, and provisionally we've just had the hottest day on record.
We're living through the hottest day on record.
Yes, with Heathrow breaching 40 degrees a few hours ago. London Luton's airport yesterday melted, and speaking on the Europe side, there are huge wildfires in France, Spain and Portugal. So much so that about half of the EU's territory is under a drought warning, and about a quarter is under an alert level for wildfire.
Wow.
So the entirety of Europe is baking. In Portugal, my own country, there's about 250 wildfires over the past few days. And according to the National Health Service, about 650 people have died. So it is a huge heat wave affecting much of Western Europe, but the UK in particular, where we're experiencing quite a lot of heat that we don't normally get.
Absolutely. Okay, topic 2. Let's move. Daily Briefing is our quick segment. Yep. You smashed it, Nelson. No offense. Okay, UK net zero changes. What's the news here?
Yeah, so Friends of the Earth, Client Earth and the Good Law Project have taken action against the government over their climate change strategy. They've claimed that the government had illegally failed to include the policies it needed to deliver promised emissions cuts. The High Court ruled that the government, so specifically the government department, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is headed by Kwasi Kwarteng for now, needs to outline exactly how its net zero policies will achieve emissions targets. Katie de Carway, I think that's how I pronounce her surname, a lawyer of Friends of the Earth, said that this landmark ruling is a huge victory for climate justice and government transparency. It shows that the Climate Change Act, which is a piece of legislation from 2008, which puts into law the 2050 targets, is a piece of legislation which has teeth and, if necessary, can be enforced through our court system if the government does not comply with its legal duties.
Cool. Big news, big transparency. Next up is Nord Stream 1.
Yeah.
Nord Stream 2 is obviously the pipeline that was never finished. Nord Stream 1 has been around for a while now. What's happening with Nord Stream 1?
Yep, so Nord Stream 1 has technically been under maintenance for a few days now, and the maintenance is meant to finish on Thursday. But what's happened is Gazprom, the Russian energy firm, has declared what's called force majeure, which translates to act of God. It's a standard clause in most contracts of any kind, and it genuinely relates to any type of unforeseeable circumstance where one party to a contract can walk away. The problem is that this party, Russia, has walked away at an opportune time for them. As we said in a video recently, the suspension of Nord Stream 1, it has been seen by a lot of people to be a preface for it just to have zero pipeline for the next few months and weeks to put pressure on Europe as a gas crisis goes on. And what Gazprom have done is basically cut things off permanently for the time being. And Germany's biggest importer has just gone, no, what are you doing? This is unjustified, and is raising arms.
Interesting. Big moment to see what's happening with Gazprom. We have 2 more news stories to come. Then we'll be straight back to discussing the Conservative leadership race. The next big story from around the world is the spy chief situation in Ukraine. That's all my notes say. But it sounds interesting from that. What's happening?
Yep, that's me again. So President Zelensky, Ukraine's president, has sacked the SBU chief, which would be the Secret Service domestically, the UK's equivalent of MI5, I believe, and the State Prosecutor General. So 2 of the highest security apparel individuals. And nominally speaking, Zelensky has justified this as there has been corruption and treason within each organisation. In the region of about 650 alleged cases of treason, and as heads of these departments, it's come on their shoulders, and they are to blame nominally. And yeah, he's called it a process of self-purification. What this means in realistic terms is just he's consolidated his grip on the security services, which, depending on what side of the debate you are, is a good thing, especially because treason with Russia, not ideal at the moment.
Absolutely. Finally then, our final daily briefing story of the day is around North Korea in Donbass. What's happening there?
Yes, so Russia's ambassador in Pyongyang has suggested that North Korea could send workers to the Donetsk and Luhansk region. So the workers would be sort of sent to help the rebuilding effort, and the ambassador in Pyongyang said and told a Russian newspaper that highly qualified and hardworking Korean builders who are capable of working in the most difficult conditions could help us to restore our social infrastructure and industrial facilities. Obviously, Ukraine aren't too keen about this. They've said that in response to North Korea, because as part of this, North Korea has actually recognized the Donetsk and Luhansk regions as Russian territory, that they've, in response to that, Ukraine has cut diplomatic ties with North Korea. And Ukraine's foreign minister has said that Russia's appeal to North Korea for support showed that Moscow had no more allies in the world, except for countries that depend on it financially and politically.
Great. Thank you for catching us up, both of you. Those were 5 news stories you might have missed from around the world. That was your daily briefing for the day. If you'd like a more structured version of that every day, then you should check out the daily briefing. It's available both on YouTube and in podcast form. If you search for the TLDR Daily Briefing on your podcast app or on YouTube, you should be able to find the channels where you can get updated in just a few minutes every single day. The Daily Briefing will be back on Thursday. We've taken a break for these live streams, but we'll be back on Thursday, so be sure to subscribe. Let's take a 20-second break, and then Ben and I are going to discuss the vote that we're about to see in about 15 minutes' time, expectations, and what's likely to happen next. We'll be back in a moment. And welcome back. We are just over 15 minutes away from the next round of results. Currently in the race, we have Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, and Kemi Badenoch. We asked you which of those 4 candidates you're backing, and it's currently a dead heat between Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt, each with 39%. Truss is sat at 8%, and Badenoch at 14%. I don't think the results will actually look like that when it comes to the Tory MPs. I suspect our audience isn't perfectly representative of the Tory MPs, maybe a tiny bit younger. But let's have a discussion about what we expect to happen in the next 15 minutes or so. Who's going to make it through to the next round and what impact that will have on the rest of the race. I am joined again by Ben Howlett, former Conservative MP, who was involved in the 2016 leadership race, working with Theresa May, and also Ben Blissett, TLDR UK's lead writer. So we have 4 people left in this round. Only 3 of them can make it through. Whoever gets the least votes is eliminated. Yesterday, that person, the person in 4th place, was Kemi Badenoch, but it was fairly close. Do you think we're going to see her in last place again, or could there be some kind of movement?
Well, I know that you spoke about this earlier, didn't you? And you seem to think that Kemi Badenoch probably is going to be last. I tend to agree. I think it's probably likely. I saw some speculation today, and I'd be interested to see whether there is any sort of foundations to this, that there might be some tactical voting from Tugendhat's sort of backers, that they might deliberately go with Badenoch to try and get rid of Truss. I think I spoke about this with Zach earlier, and I don't think it's there seems to be some speculation about it, but whether that's actually true, I don't really know. So I'd be interested to see whether you actually think that's a possibility at all, or
it's a possibility. I think you can't rule anything out at the moment with various candidates deciding to do whatever type of tactics behind the scenes, and you'll only ever find that out until the actual vote comes out itself. I've been watching on social media during your live show what other MPs have been saying. George Freeman, for example, has been out on the airwaves, who's running Penny's campaign from a policy perspective, about them thinking that they're going to win over Tom Tugendhat's votes because they're the most sort of one nation moderate vote. But then, you know, if Tom decides to do something tactical and put his support behind Kemi, potentially, or even Liz, he might end up being offered a pretty decent job in cabinet. So it's really all up to MPs at the moment, and you won't find that out for another 15 minutes.
Looking at our audience, we just put out another poll, which you should, of course, vote in. We asked them who they think will be eliminated. Broadly, they're agreeing with both of you. 64% are going Badenoch, 23% Truss, 8% Mordaunt, 5% Sunak. I think maybe the people voting for those last two might be a little optimistic in their expectations. But
we never know.
But as we were saying earlier in the live stream, this is probably the most exciting round thus far, I would say. This could really shape things. Now, we are expecting Badenoch to be eliminated, and if she is, obviously at least some segment of her voter will go towards Truss. But what would have to happen for Badenoch not to be eliminated here? We're saying that it's not a foregone conclusion, but if that's the case, what is the counter-argument? What could happen that would lead to Truss's elimination, say?
Well, I think it's worth pointing out, just to start with, that there is only, is it about 13 votes currently between them?
Yeah.
So it's not insurmountable. And also, as Zach was saying earlier, there probably is quite a lot of churn. And if you know what you were saying earlier about sort of tactical voting, things like that, it's not by any means a foregone conclusion that Badenoch's going out in this round. As you were saying, it sort of depends how today goes, and certainly what Tugendhat's supporters do as well.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on Tugendhat supporters, but also depends on who was voting for Liz last time round and whether or not they're more excited by Kemi this time round. I don't think there's been many more policy announcements come out of Kemi's campaign, so I think pretty much there's a stabilisation there about attractiveness for her. So I think it will all come down to tactical, but again, I still think it will probably be Kemi that will be out. The more interesting bit, and I know where you're going to go with this, is what actually happens with Kemi's votes afterwards.
Yes.
And you know, at the end of the day, Kemi is both ideological, but she's also very, very career hungry as well. She might say that she's come into this race without thinking about it. I mean, poppycock, you know, clearly everyone has been thinking about it. You don't go into Westminster thinking, do you know what, you've got no aspiration to be an MP, to be the Prime Minister. So clearly she has been for quite some time, and I do not know whether or not she's going to place ideological alignment with Liz Truss ahead of a career opportunity with maybe either Penny or Rishi, and time will tell on that one.
And thinking about Kemi's kind of attitude and her team's attitude today, obviously, as we say, not a foregone conclusion she's going. There isn't a huge number of MPs she need to convince. What kind of things do you expect her team will be doing today? What kind of strategies would the candidates be using today to really get those few votes across to their side?
Well, I mean, late last night, some of the campaigners behind Kemi's campaign were having to defend the fact she's just been endorsed by Britain First. And I don't think that's helping the fact that Nigel Farage has come out today and decided to endorse Kemi Badenoch as a saviour. There'll be an opposition if it isn't for Kemi Badenoch, according to that electoral winner, Nigel Farage. So, you know, I mean, Westminster electoral winner, that is, I should stress in case I get myself into trouble. But I think what she will be doing right now is shoring up her own voters within Parliament and going out there and attracting some of those Liz Truss voters as well. I very much doubt she's working with Tom Tugendhat, but again, depends what Tom Tugendhat decides to do.
And when it comes to the endorsement from both Britain First and Nigel Farage, without getting too conspiratorial.
Who wouldn't want such illustrious?
But they must be aware, both of them, especially Britain First. They have to be aware that that endorsement isn't an endorsement, really. Like, that's hurting them, if anything.
I mean,
do you think there's any chance that there's some kind of conspiracy behind it, that they don't actually want her and they're trying to taint her? Or do you think just generally they genuinely do back her?
I don't think at all. Sorry, I've taken up a lot of time. I genuinely do not think that Kemi Badenoch has been actively touting for the support of Britain First or Nigel Farage.
Sure.
I mean, absolutely no way. I think how they've handled it is really bad. So our team at Chamber had been on the phone asking, have they got a rebuttal line to this? And they said, in response, we don't give any airtime to Britain First as their response. Now, I wouldn't have said that's a very good line to take. No. So I would say, if they're going to go and become running Downing Street and having that sort of PR strategy, and we've seen how, frankly, useless the PR planning operation has been at Downing Street for many years now, then perhaps we need to think again about a potential Kemi Badenoch premiership.
Well, it's interesting that Boris Johnson came out and said that he's not going to be backing any candidate because he's worried that it might sort of taint their campaigns. And it's strange that these two groups who are
less self-aware than Boris Johnson.
Yeah, very strange, very, as you say, very strange communication strategy. And strange that they're not going for just a harsh rebuttal sort of thing. But who knows?
I don't think you could write probably 1,000 essays on Boris Johnson's PR strategy and yet not actually find the fundamental answer behind it.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a PR strategy as the answer.
No. I think strategies may be a bit grandiose.
So before we keep going, we're obviously only 8 minutes away. I just want to remind you to keep your questions coming. We are keeping an eye on the live chat. So if you have any questions, tag TLDR News. That's how we're keeping an eye on them. So be sure to tag that, and we will start asking some of the questions around now and also after the vote comes in. First question from the audience then for both of you. The candidates have broadly said during debates that they're not keen for a general election immediately afterwards. But what do you think the odds are that they may be forced in some kind of general election? Obviously, the individuals don't hold a mandate. The mandate is kind of on Boris Johnson, or he would claim, and also on the manifesto that he held. So there is some kind of there's clearly going to be a push for there to be a general election. Do you think they'll be swayed by that? Do you think we're heading into a general election, or is all of this practice for a big general election live stream we're doing right now kind of wasted?
I mean, I would suggest that probably almost certainly no. There's the mechanisms to get a general election would be either the Prime Minister calling a snap election because the 2011 Fixed Term Parliament Act was revoked. So the likelihood of them doing that with was it about 80 majority? It's huge. Is probably quite slim, and especially with the recent memory of Theresa May in 2017 deciding to call a snap election, that almost certainly won't go down well. Or possibly a vote of no confidence, but with a new leader, they probably give them a little bit of leeway. I highly doubt that they'd do anything particularly damaging so early on that would mean that their own, because it would require, as I say, about 80 MPs, Tory MPs, to either abstain or to vote against their own government and to force their hand. I see all of that as incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously personally don't like snap general elections as a result of being privatised myself on one. But in terms of the next candidate, it would be mad to go ahead and do a general election, particularly with the economy and the state that it's in as well, notwithstanding the fact that they're still trailing in the polls. So unless they've got a bounce the size that Theresa May had, notwithstanding the fact that they may end up pulling out social care as a rabbit out of the hat, God forbid if they do, then I don't think there's going to be a general election anytime soon.
We've got a question specifically for you, Ben. Someone is asking if you could give us a bit more insight about what's happening behind the scenes between these rounds of voting. Obviously, we're talking about movement. We're talking about movement for the people supporting the eliminated candidates and also between other candidates. What's actually happening? How is this mechanism working? Are they going to events and parties, and is it a great old time in Parliament at the moment, or is it more serious than that?
It's a lot more serious than that, actually. If you're running a professional campaign as well, they'll run it based on the numbers. They will know that every single one of those people that have pledged their support are actually pledging their support, and in some instances frog marching them down the corridor to make sure that they go and vote as well. So some of their campaign teams being overseas have not been very helpful. For some of the candidates, obviously, one of them obviously losing the whip over the last few days in that vindictive way, in my view, with the Select Committee Chair for Defence, Tobias Ellwood, obviously is going to have an impact in respect of Penny's campaign because he'd obviously pledged his support for her. But what happens directly after the vote tonight, the campaign teams will go and meet in one of the committee rooms. They will do a register, like a school register, it really is, and they'll go through each of the names, and then they will pick off groups who each one of the campaigners will have to go off and ensure is out voting and campaigning and supporting that particular candidate.
Yeah.
So that's basically what happens behind the scenes.
And how are they doing that? How are they kind of trying to attract these MPs that they're targeting? Have they got like fun T-shirts, magnets they're giving away, merch?
Well, I believe Rishi has got fun T-shirts.
Got fun T-shirts.
Yeah, the Obama Hope T-shirt style.
We need to get our hands on one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I believe they may be valuable for at least half a day after the election. So
we'll
get a copy, get a shirt now. But in terms of how they do it, there are a few events left. Often in the summer, there's a lot of summer parties, etc. So MPs will be going along to a lot of those summer parties. But also there's the tea room, which is for members only. So most of the candidates will be doing their sort of glad handing in there. They'll be doing private meetings, phone call. I believe that Tom Tugendhat, before he withdrew from the race, had sent out something like 1,500 campaign emails to MPs, which obviously will get the backs up of quite a large number of MPs because their inboxes are already full enough already. So I would imagine there's some skullduggery, however, going on in some of the rooms as well. So again, we'll see that in the numbers tonight.
Okay, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Sounds like we need to be invited to some of these parties. We need to secretly become an MP just to get invited. Let us know if anyone can get their hands on a Rishi T-shirt. We will pay £25 for it. We're going to take a very short break. While we do, we're going to line up the live feed, and we'll be right back with the live feed of what's happening and the results as they come in, because we are just 2 or 3 minutes away. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. As you can see, we're in split screen mode, which means we're getting very close to the next round of results. We have seen pictures from inside the room there of a lot of the senior Tories with a lot of fans. So clearly a bit warm in there yesterday, even hotter today with the heat wave. So as soon as the results come in, as soon as those fans get blowing, we will let you know what's going on. We are about a minute away, though. We've obviously just discussed predictions very quickly before they jump in. Are you both in agreement with both the audience and the two Bens that Kemi is on the way out, or do you think we could be seeing something a bit more unpredictable?
I'd say it's 70% Kemi out. But yeah, there is a chance of something more unpredictable.
Zach?
Yeah, I think that's probably about right. I'd probably give a slightly lower percentage. I think it's very hard to guess.
Lower percentage?
Point. As in a lower percentage chance that it's Kemi that goes out. I still think that she's the most likely to go out.
Okay.
But I'd probably put it sort of 40-50. I just think this is just, as we mentioned last live stream, most Machiavellian electorate of all time, and there'll be a lot of scheming. So it's just very hard to know.
So you would expect Truss to obviously be the one to go out?
Truss is the second most likely.
Yes.
But yeah.
It would be funny if Rishi did.
Well, in our poll, 7% of people voted Rishi to be the one who's eliminated. The vindication they would feel for their crazy take coming true.
Maybe we've just got Tory MPs all voting.
Maybe they know something. So if Badenoch is eliminated in a moment, if that is what we see, what would you expect for the final round tomorrow? Because tomorrow we have 3 candidates. We'll be whittling down to the final 2. If Badenoch is eliminated, do you think that's good news for Truss, good news for Mordaunt? What do you think?
Well, it's good news for Truss because she's still in.
True.
But yeah, it's hard to see where MPs will divert to. Mm-hmm. But given that they're on quite similar sides of the political debate, I would say that Truss will get a boost. Mm-hmm. Whether it's enough to keep her in the stage and keep her into the final 2, we can only see tomorrow.
Yeah, although I do think that actually as the race has gone on, there has been more and more of an ideological divide between. Just tell me if that thing starts happening.
Of course, I will. I'm keeping an eye.
There has a wider ideological gap has emerged between Truss and Badenoch, and I actually think that if Badenoch does go out, I think as Ben Howlett mentioned a second ago, she's quite likely, at least it's definitely a possibility that she will endorse someone like Rishi.
It looks like we're seeing people begin to enter the room. Let's cut to the feed there.
Good afternoon. Nearly there. As before, I will read the name of the candidate in alphabetical order with the number of votes cast for that candidate, and then specify the candidate to be eliminated from the election. Badenoch, 59 votes. Mordaunt, 92 votes. Sunak, 118 votes. Truss, 86 votes. There was one spoiled ballot paper. We had a full turn, we had one vote not cast. So, Kemi Badenoch is eliminated from the election. The remaining 3 candidates will proceed to a final ballot of the Parliamentary Party tomorrow. This will take place, I mean it this time, will take place between 1 and 3, with the result declared at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Thank you.
Okay then. So that came in broadly as expected. The results, just to recap if anyone missed that or if you couldn't hear for some reason, the results are Rishi Sunak with 118 votes is still leading the way, not quite at the 120 votes needed to secure a place in the final round. Penny Mordaunt comes in second with 92 place, kind of solidifying her position there in second, and then Liz Truss was in third with 86 votes. Kemi Badenoch was knocked out of the race, though, with 59 votes, so quite significantly behind Truss in this one. It wasn't as close as some were theorising, as I was trying to hype up in anticipation of the results. So, as a result, Kemi Badenoch is eliminated, and we have 3 candidates going into the final round of voting tomorrow. Initial reactions to that, Zach and Nelson?
So, the thing that really strikes me is the fact that Rishi is still not safe. He still has not passed the 120 threshold. You would have expected by now, at least, for him to be safe and it be a battle of the two. Yes, he's effectively safe because, like, all indications are pointing to him being in the final 2. But the fact he hasn't actually got above that threshold just points to a very divided Conservative Party, or Rishi being a tactical magician and orchestrating votes for Liz Truss. Which one it is, we don't know at this stage, but it's jarring for me.
Yeah, I think I would second that. I think the fact that we haven't seen any candidate at this point in the contest meet that 120 vote threshold is quite notable. The only other, I mean, obviously I think Kemi underperformed what we would have expected. I think the most likely outcome at this point is probably a Truss-Sunak final 2. I think that Badenoch's votes are more likely to go to Truss than Mordaunt. And I think that's probably actually bad news for the Conservative Party because we saw how well those two got on in the last leadership debate. So we're going to have a good month of that. But yeah.
Before we get to full predictions of what this means for the next round, just a refresher for anyone who's joining us now after the results. In first place in the 4th round of voting was Rishi Sunak with 118 votes. That's up 3 from the previous round. In second is Penny Mordaunt with 92. That's up 10 from the previous round. Then in third is Liz Truss, who got 86, up 15. And then eliminated in 4th place is Kemi Badenoch with 59 votes. That's only up 1. So the big winner from this, Liz Truss, up 15. Not entirely surprising, I wouldn't say. But we would have said that obviously Tom Tugendhat eliminated yesterday. He is more naturally aligned with Sunak and with Mordaunt. Between them, they picked up less votes than Truss did. Do you think that's more a factor of Tugendhat's votes moving, or is that Badenoch supporters potentially shifting away to the more electable and more likely to win candidate?
It's difficult to preempt this discussion. It's honestly impossible to tell because it's probably going to be a bit of both. It's probably going to be the fact that some of Badenoch's supporters have realised, okay, she's going to be the one to go out next. Let me back a candidate that wins so I can get a cabinet position. So that will definitely factor in. And then just the fact of Tom Tugendhat's votes redistributing, I would say they redistributed broadly evenly, but not to Kemi. So Kemi's was always going to be a push away rather than a pull towards.
Yeah, I would essentially agree with that. I think, again, it's a symptom of something we mentioned earlier, which is that there was a lot more churn in these races than people think. There's a lot more shifting sides.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Quick predictions. We're going to swap you two out for the two Bens again in a second. But quick predictions before you go. Who do you think is going to be victorious in the next round? Who are the two that are going to make it through to the final stage? Zach, you've already started, so do you want to just quickly...
Well, no, I said it earlier.
Yeah.
I think it is most likely to be Truss and Sunak. I think Sunak is so close to the threshold that he should meet it, and I presume some of the fact that he hasn't met the threshold is just because he's had some people doing tactical voting. And I do think that fundamentally more Badenoch supporters will go to Truss than Mordaunt.
I agree 100% with Zach.
Seems the audience don't agree. Our current poll puts Truss as the most likely to be eliminated, 49%, Mordaunt 43%. Sunak 8%, though interestingly those numbers are shifting as they listen to your arguments, so maybe you're more convincing than you think. We are going to be going on a very quick break. This is literally going to be 20-30 seconds. When we come back, I'll be rejoined by Ben Howlett, former Conservative MP, and Ben Blissett, TLDR UK's lead writer. So if you have any questions for them, for someone who's been inside this before, who's been part of leadership campaigns before, be sure to put those in the comments and tag TLDR News, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. But we'll be back in just 1 second. Welcome back to the Conservative leadership race, round 4. If you've just joined us, here are the results as things stand. Through to the next round, we have Rishi Sunak with 118 supporters, Penny Mordaunt with 92, and Liz Truss with 86. Eliminated in this 4th round was Kemi Badenoch with 59 votes, which is obviously 1 up from her score last time round, but still not enough to get her out of last place. I'm rejoined by Ben Blissett, TLDR UK's lead writer, and Ben Howlett, former Conservative MP. What are your immediate takes on this?
Well, I'm a bit surprised that Tom's vote didn't end up going off en bloc like it had been promised to do so. So it looks as though Liz Truss has picked up some of those votes, and also Penny Mordaunt has picked up some of those votes as well. Rishi Sunak's number of votes haven't necessarily picked up in probably the way that they would have imagined. So I think that's quite telling in itself. But roll this on to tomorrow. Kemi Badenoch clearly is king or queen maker, and it's all going to come down to where her 59 votes are going to go. And this is the question that we need to ask. Is it going to be leadership that she's looking for in the future, so therefore she's going to prioritise a role in cabinet, or is it going to be an ideological preference? But when she's thinking about this, she's going to have to decide, does she want to ultimately be in the campaign team of the candidate that will come second with members? Because I still do not see Rishi Sunak polling as well with members as high as, strangely, either Penny or Liz. So we're going to have to see what happens over the next 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also worth just saying how tight it is now between... I know we were saying today was probably going to be... It's been the most interesting round so far, but with, there's Liz Truss on 86 votes now and Penny Mordaunt on 92, it's incredibly close. And, when we've got a block of 59 votes being realigned tomorrow, it really, I mean, we said today could go anyway, but there was sort of... I think we agreed at least that Badenoch was probably the most likely to go, but I couldn't say with confidence out of Mordaunt or Truss at all. It's a complete toss-up for me about who could go tomorrow.
I'm going to have to look at the maths again because I was just doing it very, very quickly in there, but I was trying to work out whether or not there could be a redistribution so that Penny and Liz end up being the final two.
That would be interesting. That would be exceptionally exciting if that happened tomorrow.
Not mathematically impossible, at least.
No.
Your predictions, though. We just asked the other two who they think is going to be eliminated in the next round. Obviously, very early to say, caveat. But I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you the question. So, who wants to go first?
I don't think either of us want to go at all, let alone first. I would reluctantly say I think it'll be. The whole time I've said I think it'll be Rishi Mordaunt. I'm now going to switch, and I think it could be Truss, Rishi and Liz.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a 50-50. I'm not a betting person, so I would not put a bet on this one. But I think it could go literally three ways now. And one of the options, I think anyway, is the potential that Rishi actually loses out completely. So it could go literally one of any of those ways. I will just, however, prioritise what I believe in as the best candidate for this potential contest, who will ultimately make the best Prime Minister. And looking at the three candidates and how they performed in the debates, how they performed in respect of MPs, hustings, and all the rest. I mean, I would personally now go out and say that Penny Mordaunt would be the best Prime Minister out of all of those three candidates. Rishi Sunak clearly is not performing in the way that most of us had hoped he would amongst MPs, and that's going to be crucial for when they ultimately become the next Prime Minister, because they've got to command the majority of MPs on the Conservative benches. And I'm not sure he will. It will be a very, very difficult Parliament to manage. And showing a divided party before a next general election, I think, will be absolutely catastrophic for the Conservative Party.
Do you see a redistribution of Sunak's votes as a likelihood then, or do you think that's just sort of a possibility that could be quite interesting?
Well, I mean, I keep bringing up Gavin Williamson, which is not a household name at the moment for obvious reasons. But, you know, if he's involved in something, and if there are others like him in that circuit that are involved in something, then I suspect there might be some sort of skullduggery going on. And do not rule out the hand of Boris Johnson in the background as well. So whilst he's obviously said it's up to MPs to decide, there are a lot of his supporters that know exactly who he's backing for this, and whether or not they will try and do the dirty on Rishi like he did the dirty on Boris, don't underestimate it.
Indulge me in a stupid hypothetical for the moment. We've got the results. It's a dead heat. All three have exactly the same number of votes. They dive into the rule book of the 1922 committee. Turns out, by some strange coincidence, the leader of the opposition gets to choose who's eliminated. If you were Keir Starmer, which of the three are you most scared of, and who would you eliminate?
This is like the worst fan fiction of anything ever.
I don't know. It's like a choose your own adventure. Once you've chosen, I'll open the pages to something else. Who do you think Keir is most scared of?
Of course, some people on the left of the Labour Party would probably say he has got a vote anyway in a Tory leadership election. But in terms of who I'd be most scared of, I'd probably be most scared of Penny Mordaunt because she is absolutely ruthless at the dispatch box, and he comes across as a bit of a bureaucrat.
Yeah, I think Mordaunt would be. Yeah, she's a good media operator. I think Rishi can, when it comes to personal attacks and things, I don't think Rishi deals with those particularly well. I think we saw that a little bit with the whole tax situation earlier this year. I think Liz Truss, as we saw in the debates, she's not superb at the sort of public communications really. So I think Mordaunt.
Yeah, and if MPs do think that he's going to come second, then that's going to be really interesting to what happens later on today with Kemi's votes.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are the results of this round, and we've got a good insight there of what we expect to see happen tomorrow. The insight being anything could happen, so you have to tune in again tomorrow. Before we sign off for today, though, and before we all get ready for tomorrow's live stream, we've been asking people throughout today's stream to ask questions to our panel. And if you want to, there probably is still just about time to pose a last couple of questions tagging TLDR News. But let's run through some of those questions before we close up today. Firstly, question for you specifically, Ben. You're both called Ben, so it's not useful. Ben Howler. Someone's asking, obviously, you are part of the Conservative Party. You were part of the Parliamentary Conservative Party for a while, though. it seems from this person's perspective, as an international viewer, that the Conservative Party are moving further right in their ideology generally, and specifically when it comes to the candidates that are being selected here. Do you think that is a genuine trend, or is that something that's being misinterpreted?
I don't think it's being misinterpreted. I just think it's a lot more complicated than potentially the sort of academic textbooks give it credit for at the moment. So post-Brexit, there's a huge amount of realignment in British politics. And I would probably put the defining line now more down to the sort of generational shift rather than generational divide, rather than on whether or not it's left or right. And because of the fact that the Boris Johnson government was particularly populist versus sort of ideological, it's very hard to sort of draw where a left-wing, right-wing line is now. And that's obviously indicative in terms of the attacks on Rishi Sunak on his tax policies. So I suspect, however, that may go back to a little bit more of a standard left-right type argument after this election.
Another question from the audience then. Do you think that the cabinet are going to entirely be? Do you think the cabinet will be entirely changed by the next leader, or do you think that some of the current setup, Rees-Mogg and co, as the question asker asks, do you think they'll remain, or do you think we'll see a complete refresh and an attempt to reset from Johnson?
It sort of depends who wins.
Sure.
So very much depends who wins. I think that they'll keep some of their key allies on. I think Sunak probably has some allies still in cabinet that he'd probably like to keep there if he was to win. I think if you were to have someone like Penny Mordaunt, I think she might try and refresh it a bit, bring some of her people in, especially because she hasn't really been in high-level cabinet recently. I think the question, unfortunately, very much rests on what happens tomorrow. And as we've just said, predicting that is quite hard.
Yeah, I'm just wondering which position Liz Truss will give Nadine Dorries next.
God,
Phil's, I'm sure most of us would fear.
Defence?
Yes, thank God for... Anyway, moving on quickly. In terms of Penny, I think it would be a mistake if she did do a complete wipe the slate clean, because, as I said before, you've got to bring all parts of the party together with you. And if you've got a big block of the Boris Johnson supporters who feel alienated outside of the cabinet, you do not want to have an inbuilt rebellion of 40 MPs all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying with Parliament, staying with the Cabinet, someone's suggesting that as Tom Tugendhat proved pretty popular with the electorate, good orator, as we discussed during the debates, do you think that he is a shoo-in in any of the winners' cabinets, specifically when it comes to Defence Secretary? Do you think we're going to see more of Tom Tugendhat in the future, whether it be in the next cabinet or going forward more generally?
I don't think defence, because I would probably put good money on the current Defence Secretary keeping his job because of the conflict in Ukraine, and it's not a good time to end up having an experienced Secretary of State of Defence. So I think that one's out. I think he's done enough, definitely, to secure a Minister of State role. I would be shocked if he didn't get something around foreign affairs, like a Minister of State and Foreign Affairs would be a very, very good position for him. But, Tom has got a vision on a range of different subjects. So I suspect if he hasn't got a Minister of State and Foreign Affairs, he'll end up in a junior cabinet position somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they'd be almost stupid not to put him somewhere in the cabinet, and almost certainly in some kind of foreign affairs role. As you say, he was very popular in the debate, popular among the membership. I think, it would be...
Actually, in terms of the numbers today, his vote obviously split, didn't it? Actually, yes. I didn't think about this until just now, whilst you were speaking, that if he's ended up promising one candidate and promising the other candidate exactly the same thing, then potentially, actually, he might end up also not getting any cabinet position whatsoever.
Yes.
So his voting bloc doesn't seem to end up going with him, which often does sway a Prime Minister in terms of which way they're promoting an MP or not.
Speaking of people's future positions in Parliament, in Cabinet, we've obviously seen Theresa May remain in Parliament after being removed from the number 10. We've also seen people like Ed Miliband, former leader of the opposition. What do we think the future holds for Boris Johnson? Purely speculating here, obviously. Do you expect to see Boris Johnson remain in Parliament? Will he run again as an MP, or is he off after this?
Well, I think there's been some speculation that he's got some money, maybe not problem, but he would certainly be keen to earn some more money, and I think he'd be more likely to do that.
I feel like it feels like something you would say.
But I think we know why as well.
But I think he's probably, for that very reason, unlikely to stay in Parliament. I think he can get lucrative book deals. He's also working on a book at the minute, isn't he, on Shakespeare that he wanted to finish? So perhaps he's going to sort of retire, do a David Cameron, get a little very expensive shed, and right from there.
I can't see Boris in a shed.
No,
but
I can't see him in
I
a
certainly
shed.
can. There's nothing. There's nothing about Boris that likes Remain, put it that way. So I suspect he's going to end up leaving quite quickly. His constituency is also marginal, by the way. So
there was the polling, wasn't there, done a few months ago that was saying that if an election was held, he would likely, from the polling, lose his seat.
Yeah, he's got that book deal. I believe it's about £1 million book deal he's secured as well. That will pay off some of the debts. He's also got his book he's writing on Shakespeare, which he was doing all the way through the pandemic, and probably setting up a party company as well.
Or possibly even the States, do some talking, do some speaking tours in the States, something like that.
I mean, someone's asked a question about it. In fact, he was already referencing the deep state, the infamous US conspiracy theory in yesterday's remarks to the Parliament.
Maybe he'll go really right-wing and become like a right-wing YouTuber and just, do all that sort of stuff.
Defect to Breitbart.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Deep end. Okay, a couple more questions before we wrap up. What do we think about, obviously we said there won't be another general election, or they've all said there won't be a general election. You both broadly believe them, at least in the time being. It's obviously too early to tell, but current polling is suggesting that Labour are onto a good thing if there's a general election right now, potentially some kind of Labour-Lib Dem coalition. Do you think that in the time, because even if they don't call a snap general election, we're still not that far away from a general election. Do you think that the new winner, obviously dependent on who it is, has enough time to turn it around? Could they change the fate of the government? Or are we in such a Tory-hating mode as a nation, or at least segments of the nation, that it's going to be an uphill battle?
I think it is a short turnaround because obviously the cost of living crisis is only set to get worse. Inflation is also sort of not going to sort of recover, and it's still going to be affecting people's pockets until the next election. So I think that's still, it's quite a short time to try and turn that around. But yeah, it sort of depends on the leader and whether they're able to. I mean, people do have quite a short memory, the electorate, in sometimes in politics. So there's always the possibility that they would be able to turn that around. I think that Johnson was already quite tainted, and a lot of the problems were around Johnson personally. If you talk about Partygate and things like that, if he'd have stayed in, I'd have said that it probably was too late. He'd been tainted too much. But because there's a fresh leader, perhaps the electorate will, maybe they'll look more fondly upon that, and maybe they'll sort of forgive more.
Yeah, there's normally a bounce once you've got a new leader anyway. And that's at the end of the day why there was sort of a snap election in 2017, if you remember. So I think the issue will be down to who that leader is. If it's a managed decline leader towards an opposition in waiting for the 14-year-old Conservative government, then I think it's toast. But and Labour don't really need to say anything, to be honest with you. They just go into that sort of coalition. But I am unsure if the public are yet willing to trust Labour Party, particularly in red wall constituencies, on the issues of Brexit. So I still don't see that changing.
And as Ben says, there's obviously a lot still to come beyond just who wins and how they fare. There's so much going on with the economy, with all of those kind of issues, that it's a case of if we do sink into a recession, Brexit might suddenly seem like a rather trivial issue relative to the ongoing cost of living crisis. Obviously, there's still a lot of passion around Brexit, a lot of excitement, a lot of anger, so it would take quite a lot to diminish that, but you can see in the next couple of years it's at least possible.
Yeah.
Final question then, before we go, one that's kind of meta on this whole live stream project. What do you think about the process that we're going through right now? This is obviously a process which almost is designed to allow scheming and planning and plotting. That is maybe a good thing, depending on perspective, but equally you could make the case that isn't the best way to choose a leader through this long, protracted election process. What are your thoughts on it, besides the fact it makes great live stream content? Do you think that it's something that ought to be changed, will be changed?
I mean, Love Island's on at the minute, and it does sort of remind me a lot of that. It's a very sort of protracted, sort of tactical at times, but quite dramatic way of selecting someone.
Yeah. So you're proposing ITV2 are in charge of the next leadership election?
Yeah, not quite.
Okay.
But no, I do think it's I do think it's a very interesting way of doing it. I think it's a very interesting way of whittling it down. Perhaps at the minute, just with the fact that the fact that there's been so much scandal and there's been so much politics happening in the last few weeks, I think there's a chance that the public might be a little bit weary of all of this, and perhaps a shorter one would go down better with the public. But obviously from our perspective, in terms of just covering it and that kind of thing is an interesting way of doing it.
I'm not going to start advocating MPs wearing bikinis on beaches in order to decide how they're going to vote. But
I wasn't either, just to be clear.
I bet you weren't. In terms of the protracted leadership election, as a party member myself, and I'm still a car-carrying member, that's only because I get to vote in a leadership election. And it's sort of three things are absolutely certain in life: death, taxes, and a Tory party leadership election race. And you don't get anything else for your money. So you might as well end up keeping the card and enabling yourself to vote for whoever's going to be the next Prime Minister, or the leader of the opposition at that point. So I think there's, however, something a bit more provocative which I could say on this, which is, the days where 100,000 party members are responsible for choosing a party leader and thus Prime Minister, I think is slightly outdated. We posted something on Chamber a couple of days ago which was provocatively saying remove that. I don't agree upon that, but there's got to be a better way out there. It's very sort of 19th century, well, similar to the whole parliamentary system in this country. It's 19th century, but there's got to be a more democratic way to choose your leaders than what we've got at the moment.
Absolutely. Speaking of Chamber, last time we tried to shout it out, the microphones all died. So let's test that conspiracy theory, see if someone's hacking in. Do you want to quickly tell people what they're looking for and where to go for that?
I was going to say that's bad. Someone pulls the plug just as we're about to start. Again, it's gone off again. There we go. No, Chamber UK is a new platform which is at www.chamberuk.com. It's a platform for anyone out in the country to hear about insight, analysis around the political world, and more contributions the better. If anyone has any thoughts they want to post on it, very welcome to. We're a publisher at the end of the day, and we're out and around the country doing broadcasts, so very welcome to join.
Awesome. That is all we have time for today. Thank you to all of the contributors in this stream, to Nelson, to Zach, to Ben, and to Ben. Thanks again to Scarlett. Congratulations on escaping Amsterdam and to making it here today. Presuming everything goes smoothly, we will be back again tomorrow. I'm not expecting anyone to get stuck in a foreign country again, but you never know. We'll be back again tomorrow. The next round of results is tomorrow at 4 p.m. So we will be around on the stream between 2:30 and 3. We're currently working out exact scheduling and potentially a special guest for the stream. So it could be pushed forward to 2:30. But if you head over to the stream now, it's on our YouTube channel. You can press the button to be notified when we go live. Or alternatively, just make sure you're subscribed and you ring the bell to be notified every time we go live on one of these streams. Also, one final shout out. This stream was brought to you by Nebula, and over there you can find all of our additional bonus exclusive content. So if you've been watching for the last, 2 hours, 11 minutes, and that's not enough of my voice, there is more exclusively on Nebula that you've not seen before. And that's serious stuff, like our discussion with Ben Howlett, about the leadership race and his thoughts on the debates, and going deeper than we did today on a number of different issues. That full half-hour interview is on Nebula. There's also the full interview we did with Opinion earlier about polling and about how the process works of polling. That's exclusive on Nebula too. We've also got fun content there too. We've got the TLDR blooper reel, which involves Ben and I making a lot of mistakes when recording videos. We've got our studio tour. We've got us attempting the UK citizenship test and a bunch of the team failing. There's a bunch of fun stuff over there. And on top of that, you can watch all of our videos ad-free. You almost certainly know the drill by this point, but essentially if you sign up the Nebula Curiosity Stream bundle, you can pay about £1 a month to get access to both Curiosity Stream and Nebula. And for everyone who does sign up, we get some of that money. So it really helps us out. It really helps out the channel. So if you sign up using the link below, if you sign up to Curiosity Stream, you'll also get access to Nebula, all the stuff I've just said, and of course you'll be supporting the channel. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your support, and we will see you tomorrow at sometime around 3 o'clock. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you then. Goodbye.